On my daughter's 40th birthday, standing on the beautiful cedar deck I built with my own two hands, she handed me a glossy welcome packet for an assisted living facility and told me it was my new home. I had paid for the party, the house, the life that allowed her to stand there and smile for her friends. I was a father, a provider, a craftsman. In one single, rehearsed speech, I became a problem to be solved. But the next morning, when I walked out that door and turned off the fire hose of money that funded their entire existence, they learned a lesson about what it truly costs to stand on your own 2 feet. Before we dive in, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments, what's the best birthday gift you've ever received? It'll make sense in a minute. The music was the first thing that felt wrong. It wasn't music for a party, it was a playlist. A carefully curated stream of lo-fi ambient pop that served as a trendy, unobtrusive background hum. It was the kind of music you'd hear in a high-end coffee shop, not at a 40th birthday celebration in a coastal town like Port Blossom. I stood near the railing of the deck, the scent of the salty Oregon air mixing with the expensive catering Chloe had insisted on. My daughter's friends, all sleek and modern-looking, held their wine glasses with a practiced ease, talking about brand synergies and engagement metrics. I didn't understand half of it, but I smiled and nodded. A father is supposed to be proud, and I was. I looked down at the deck beneath my feet. Cedar, milled just up the coast. I'd spent the entire spring of 2019 building it for her and Leo, a housewarming gift after I'd sold my own home, the one I'd shared with her mother, to give them the down payment for this place. Every board was perfectly spaced, every screw countersunk. It was solid. It was real. In a world of curated playlists and digital personas, this deck was something you could count on. I thought my role in their lives was the same. Solid, dependable, a foundation. Okay, everyone. Can I have your attention for a minute? Chloe's voice cut through the electronic haze. She was beaming, standing in the center of the deck, her husband Leo's arm draped possessively around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, and my heart swelled with a familiar, painful pride. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hair perfect, her smile calibrated for the camera phone one of her friends was holding up, no doubt for her blog. This wasn't just a party. It was content. I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this huge milestone with me, she began, her voice practiced and smooth. And I especially want to thank my dad. She turned her bright smile on me, and a ripple of appreciative awes went through the crowd. I felt my face flush with warmth. For my entire life, he's been my rock. He's always been there to support me, to lift me up, and to give me everything I needed to build this incredible life. She walked toward me, and Leo followed, holding a slim, elegantly wrapped gift. It wasn't large, but it was clearly expensive, wrapped in thick, cream-colored paper with a silver bow. Dad, your support has meant the world to us, she continued, her voice taking on a serious, almost therapeutic tone. And as we all get older, we know that support is a two-way street. It's our turn to support you, to be proactive, and help you plan for your next chapter in a way that's safe, comfortable, and optimized. My smile faltered. Optimized? What an odd word choice. Leo handed her the gift, and she presented it to me. It felt light, like a book or a thick magazine. The crowd watched expectantly. I fumbled with the ribbon, my calloused boat builder's hand suddenly feeling clumsy and thick. The paper tore away to reveal a pristine, glossy brochure. The title was printed in a gentle, flowing script, Seaside Meadows Senior Living. Below it, a picture of a smiling, silver-haired couple playing chess on a sun-drenched patio. The music seemed to fade into a dull buzz in my ears. I stared at the cover, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. This had to be a joke, a strange, tasteless joke. I looked up at Chloe, searching her face for a punchline, but there was only a serene, determined smile. We took a tour last week, she announced to the silent, watching crowd. It's a fantastic facility, Dad. They have a woodworking shop, social activities, and full-time nursing staff. We realized that with Leo's new app taking off and my brand growing, we really need to convert your room into a proper home office and recording studio. This house just doesn't have the space for 3 adults anymore. Someone near the back dropped a wine glass. The shatter echoed across the deck, loud and violent in the sudden, crushing silence. I felt the brochure in my hands, its smooth, laminated surface feeling slick and foreign. My friend Evelyn, who had been her mother's best friend, was staring at Chloe, her mouth agape in horror. "We've already put down the deposit for a private suite for you," Leo added, his voice laced with the casual confidence of a man who has never been told no. "It's all arranged. They're expecting you at the start of next month. We figured this was the perfect time to tell you in front of all the people who love you, so you could see how much we're doing to take care of you." Take care of me. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They weren't taking care of me, they were getting rid of me. They were optimizing me out of my own home, the home I paid for, on the deck I built. I looked from Chloe's unwavering smile to Leo's smug expression, then down at the smiling strangers on the cover of the brochure. They looked happy, peaceful, and utterly defeated. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the fairy lights I'd helped hang that morning, I felt the solid cedar deck beneath my feet begin to give way. The world didn't come rushing back with noise and chaos, but with a slow, agonizing trickle of human awkwardness. The silence on the deck was a vacuum, and people, desperate to escape it, began to move. It started with murmurs, then the scrape of a chair. A woman I didn't know grabbed her purse, muttering something about a babysitter. A man patted his pockets and announced he needed to make a call. No one looked at me. Their eyes darted everywhere else, at the string lights, at their shoes, at the darkening sky over the Pacific. They were fleeing the scene of an execution, desperate not to be seen as accomplices. Evelyn was the only one who met my gaze. Her face, usually so full of life, was a mask of pale fury and heartbreak. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched, but her husband put a gentle hand on her arm, shaking his head slightly. This was a family wound, too deep for a friend to step into right now. He steered her toward the door, and as she passed, she mouthed the words, "Call me." I gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. Then they were gone. Chloe and Leo stood frozen in the center of their little stage, the triumphant smiles gone, replaced by a defensive stiffness. They watched as their guests, their precious social currency, evaporated into the night. Within 5 minutes, the deck was empty, save for the three of us and the ghost of a party. Abandoned plates of half-eaten artisanal cheese, glasses of expensive wine sweating onto the cedar planks I had so carefully sealed. Chloe finally moved, not toward me, but to start gathering glasses with a clatter, her movements jerky and angry, as if the guest's departure was the real offense. I didn't say a word. I simply turned, the glossy brochure still clutched in my right hand, and walked into the house. I passed through the sliding glass door I'd installed myself, into the living room with the built-in bookshelves I'd spent a month crafting. My footsteps felt heavy, alien, on the hardwood floors. I could hear their hushed, tense whispers from the deck behind me, but the words were indistinct, just a venomous hiss that slid under the door. I walked down the hall to my small room at the back of the house and closed the door, the soft click of the latch sounding like a vault ceiling shut. The room was sparse, holding only what I needed: a single bed, a dresser, a small armchair where I read, and a photo of my wife Sarah on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed, the brochure resting on my knees. Seaside Meadows. The name was an insult, a cheap attempt to soften the brutal reality of what it was, a waiting room for the end of a life. I stared at the photo of Sarah. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. It was taken on this very coast, not 20 miles from where I now sat, on our last anniversary before she got sick. The sea breeze was in her hair, and she looked so impossibly alive. Staring at her face, the sterile, beige walls of my room seemed to dissolve, the scent of the sea air replaced by the sharp, clean smell of antiseptic and lemon-scented floor cleaner. The curated party playlist faded, and in its place, I heard the quiet, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The hospital room was drenched in the pale, indifferent light of a cloudy afternoon. Sarah was propped up on 3 pillows, looking small and fragile against the starched white sheets. The cancer had taken so much, but it hadn't touched her eyes. They were still the same clear, intelligent blue, and right now, they were fixed on me with a fierce intensity. "You're staring, Frank," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I reached for her hand, my large, rough palm enveloping her delicate fingers. "Just looking at my girl," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. She managed a weak smile. "Still your girl." A fit of coughing seized her, a harsh, rattling sound that tore through the quiet room. I held a cup of water with a straw to her lips until it passed. She sank back against the pillows, exhausted. "Frank," she said after a long silence, her eyes focused on the ceiling, "we need to talk about Chloe." My stomach tightened. "She's fine, Sarah. She's strong. She's soft," Sarah corrected gently. "Not in a bad way, but she's always wanted the easy path, the pretty things. She has a good heart, but it's buried under a lot of wanting." She turned her head on the pillow to look at me again, her gaze unwavering. "She's going to need you. After I'm gone, she's going to lean on you for everything." "That's my job," I said. "I'll take care of her, always." "I know you will." Her thumb stroked the back of my hand. "But you have to promise me something. Promise me you'll look after her. Help her get on her feet, make sure she and the kids are stable. She needs a foundation." "I promise, Sarah. Whatever it takes, I promise." The words came out thick with unshed tears. Her grip on my hand tightened. "That's the easy part of the promise for you, Frank," she said, her voice suddenly gaining a sliver of its old strength. "You're a giver. You'd give until there was nothing left of you. So here's the hard part." She waited until my eyes met hers. "Promise me you won't let her erase you. Promise me you'll remember that you get to have a life too. Don't let them walk all over you just because you're a foundation. Even foundations crack under too much weight." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. It felt like a strange, abstract warning. How could my own daughter erase me? How could caring for her be anything other than my life's purpose now? But I saw the desperate plea in her eyes, the fear she had for me, not just for Chloe. "I promise," I whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "I won't." She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the fine lines on her temple. "Good," she breathed, a sigh of faint relief. "She's our daughter, but you're my husband. Your life matters too." The beep of the heart monitor faded, and the scent of the ocean returned, seeping in through the closed window of my room. I was back. Back in the house I'd paid for, in the room they had designated as temporary. My hand was trembling as I reached out and touched the photo of Sarah. Her warning, which had seemed so abstract in that hospital room, was now ringing in my ears like a fire alarm. "Don't let her erase you." I looked down at the brochure on my lap. Seaside Meadows Senior Living. An elegant, streamlined process for erasure. A place with a woodworking shop to keep me occupied while my life was dismantled, my room converted, my memory wallpapered over with Chloe's ambition. For 6 years, I had kept the easy part of my promise. I had given and given until my own home, my own savings, my own future was gone. I had become a foundation, just as she'd said, and now they were done building on top of me. They had what they wanted, and it was time to clear the lot. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had not only lost my daughter tonight, I had failed my wife. I had let the very thing she'd warned me about happen. I had let them walk all over me, and as I sat there in the silence, the crushing weight of that failure was the only thing I had left. The weight of my failure was so immense it felt like it could physically crush me, pinning me to the edge of this temporary bed in this temporary room. I sat there for I don't know how long, staring at Sarah's photo, the glossy brochure for Seaside Meadows, lying face down on my comforter like a tombstone. The sounds of the house, sounds I knew intimately. The hum of the refrigerator I'd repaired, the groan of the pipes I'd insulated seemed to mock me. This was the foundation I had built. And as my wife had predicted, it was cracking under the weight. A sharp, impatient knock on the door jolted me back to the present. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a summons. "Dad, can we come in? We need to talk logistics." It was Chloe. Her voice had shed the performative warmth from the party. Now it was all business. I didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. She stood there, her arms crossed, with Leo hovering behind her, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to finalize the terms of my surrender. "Look, Dad, I know that was a lot to take in back there," Chloe began, stepping into the room. She didn't sit, choosing instead to stand over me. "I get that this is emotional for you, but we need you to see the bigger picture. This is a positive move for everyone's growth." I finally looked up from the floor, my voice raspy. "Your mother. I promised your mother I'd take care of you. Oh, a flicker of something guilt maybe crossed her face before it was replaced by a mask of therapeutic resolve. And you did, she said, her tone softening into a well-rehearsed gentleness. You gave us the stability we needed to get to this point, but part of being a parent is knowing when to let your children build their own life. We need this space, Dad. We need to be independent. Independent? The word came out as a strangled whisper. Chloe, I pay the mortgage. I pay the electricity, the water, the internet. Every single bill for 6 years. How is this independent? This was where Leo stepped forward, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder as if to protect her from my outrageous question. Okay, let's not be dramatic, Frank, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. We appreciate the help, we really do. But you've been living here for 6 years. You ate the food, you watched the TV, you used the Wi-Fi. What you paid was essentially rent, room and board. It's not like it was a gift. It was an arrangement, and now that arrangement is ending. The sheer breathtaking audacity of that statement knocked the air from my lungs. Room and board. 6 years of my pension, of the entire proceeds from the sale of my home, reduced to a boarding house fee. The deck? I stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the house. The bookshelves. I fixed the furnace last winter. Leo actually chuckled. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound. Frank, that's just basic upkeep. Hobby stuff. We're talking about our careers. I need a dedicated, soundproof space if I'm going to attract serious investors. My desk, my monitors, my recording equipment, it's a 5-figure setup. That can't just be crammed into a corner of the living room. It needs a real office. He gestured around my small room, his eyes already redesigning the space. And this room has the best natural light. It's perfect. He saw a space with good lighting. I saw the last sanctuary of my life. Chloe chimed in, her voice now firm, the velvet glove stripped away to reveal the iron fist. We've made a list to make the transition easier, she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. We can help you pack your personal items this weekend. Clothes, books, photos, that sort of thing. She looked around the room. The bed and the dresser actually came with the house when we bought it, so obviously those will stay. It's better to start fresh at Seaside Meadows anyway. Their rooms come furnished. Every word was a carefully placed nail in my coffin. They had discussed this, planned it, made lists. They had already decided which parts of my life were mine to keep, and which belonged to the house now. It's for the kids too, Dad, she added, a final manipulative twist of the knife. They're getting older. They need a real playroom, and once we move your things out of the garage, we can finally set that up for them. They were going to clear out my workshop, the last place I had that felt truly mine, filled with the tools I'd used to build boats, to build furniture, to build this life they were now so casually dismantling. That's what I was to them, just more clutter to be cleared out of the garage. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, so meticulously planned, that there were no words to meet it. I just stared at them, two strangers standing in my bedroom, mapping out my obsolescence. My promise to Sarah echoed in my head, a frantic, desperate alarm. Don't let them erase you. We'll leave you to process, Chloe said, her voice softening again now that the unpleasant business was concluded. She placed the folded list on my nightstand, next to the photo of her mother. The facility's welcome coordinator will call you on Monday to arrange the move-in date. Try to get some rest, Dad. They turned and left, closing the door behind them. The click of the latch was deafening. I looked at the list on the nightstand, then at Sarah's smiling face. They weren't just taking my room. They were taking my purpose, my history, my promise. They were erasing me, and in the cold, dead silence of the room, a new feeling began to smolder beneath the grief. It was a slow-burning, unfamiliar anger, and it was the only thing I had left. The weight of my failure was so immense it felt like it could physically crush me, pinning me to the edge of this temporary bed in this temporary room. I sat there for I don't know how long, staring at Sarah's photo, the glossy brochure for Seaside Meadows lying face down on my comforter like a tombstone. The sounds of the house, sounds I knew intimately. The hum of the refrigerator I'd repaired, the groan of the pipes I'd insulated seemed to mock me. This was the foundation I had built. And as my wife had predicted, it was cracking under the weight. A sharp, impatient knock on the door jolted me back to the present. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a summons. Dad, can we come in? We need to talk logistics. It was Chloe. Her voice had shed the performative warmth from the party. Now it was all business. I didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. She stood there, her arms crossed, with Leo hovering behind her, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to finalize the terms of my surrender. Look, Dad, I know that was a lot to take in back there, Chloe began, stepping into the room. She didn't sit, choosing instead to stand over me. I get that this is emotional for you, but we need you to see the bigger picture. This is a positive move for everyone's growth. I finally looked up from the floor, my voice raspy. Your mother, I promised your mother I'd take care of you. A flicker of something guilt maybe crossed her face before it was replaced by a mask of therapeutic resolve. And you did, she said, her tone softening into a well-rehearsed gentleness. You gave us the stability we needed to get to this point. But part of being a parent is knowing when to let your children build their own life. We need this space, Dad. We need to be independent. Independent? The word came out as a strangled whisper. Chloe, I pay the mortgage. I pay the electricity, the water, the internet, every single bill for 6 years. How is this independent? This was where Leo stepped forward, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder as if to protect her from my outrageous question. Okay, let's not be dramatic, Frank, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. We appreciate the help, we really do. But you've been living here for 6 years. You ate the food, you watched the TV, you used the Wi-Fi. What you paid was essentially rent, room and board. It's not like it was a gift. It was an arrangement, and now that arrangement is ending. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of that statement knocked the air from my lungs. Room and board. 6 years of my pension, of the entire proceeds from the sale of my home, reduced to a boarding house fee. The deck, I stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the house. The bookshelves. I fixed the furnace last winter. Leo actually chuckled. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound. Frank, that's just basic upkeep. Hobby stuff. We're talking about our careers. I need a dedicated, soundproofed space if I'm going to attract serious investors. My desk, my monitors, my recording equipment. It's a 5-figure setup. That can't just be crammed into a corner of the living room. It needs a real office. He gestured around my small room, his eyes already redesigning the space. And this room has the best natural light. It's perfect. He saw a space with good lighting. I saw the last sanctuary of my life. Chloe chimed in, her voice now firm, the velvet glove stripped away to reveal the iron fist. We've made a list to make the transition easier, she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. We can help you pack your personal items this weekend. Clothes, books, photos, that sort of thing. She looked around the room. The bed and the dresser actually came with the house when we bought it, so obviously those will stay. It's better to start fresh at Seaside Meadows anyway. Their rooms come furnished. Every word was a carefully placed nail in my coffin. They had discussed this, planned it, made lists. They had already decided which parts of my life were mine to keep and which belonged to the house now. It's for the kids too, Dad, she added, a final, manipulative twist of the knife. They're getting older. They need a real playroom, and once we move your things out of the garage, we can finally set that up for them. They were going to clear out my workshop, the last place I had that felt truly mine, filled with the tools I'd used to build boats, to build furniture, to build this life they were now so casually dismantling. That's what I was to them, just more clutter to be cleared out of the garage. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, so meticulously planned, that there were no words to meet it. I just stared at them, two strangers standing in my bedroom mapping out my obsolescence. My promise to Sarah echoed in my head, a frantic, desperate alarm. Don't let them erase you. We'll leave you to process, Chloe said, her voice softening again now that the unpleasant business was concluded. She placed the folded list on my nightstand next to the photo of her mother. The facility's welcome coordinator will call you on Monday to arrange the move-in date. Try to get some rest, Dad. They turned and left, closing the door behind them. The click of the latch was deafening. I looked at the list on the nightstand, then at Sarah's smiling face. They weren't just taking my room. They were taking my purpose, my history, my promise. They were erasing me. And in the cold, dead silence of the room, a new feeling began to smolder beneath the grief. It was a slow-burning, unfamiliar anger, and it was the only thing I had left. The hours after they left my room were a thick, silent fog. Night settled over Port Blossom, but sleep was a distant country I had no visa for. The folded list they'd left on my nightstand seemed to radiate a cold energy in the dark. Personal items, clothes, books, photos, an inventory for an eviction. My eviction. The anger that had started to smolder in my gut was a low, pilot-light flame, not yet strong enough to burn through the suffocating blanket of grief. Doing nothing felt like accepting defeat, but doing anything felt like complying with their terms. Finally, around 2 a.m., I knew I couldn't just sit there. I had to move. I pulled an old, worn duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet and started the grim process of packing. It was a mechanical, joyless task. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of work pants, a handful of socks. Each item I touched felt like a relic from a life that was no longer mine. I picked up a worn copy of Moby Dick from my nightstand, its spine cracked and soft from countless readings. I remembered reading it aloud to Sarah in the early years of our marriage. To be kept, the list in my head decided. At the foot of my bed was my old sea chest. It was made of dark, heavy pine, with rope handles and tarnished brass fittings. It had traveled with me on fishing boats up to Alaska in my youth and had held my tools for decades before I'd built the workshop in the garage. Now it just held memories. I knelt and lifted the heavy lid, the scent of old wood, salt, and thyme rising to meet me. Inside, nestled amongst old photo albums and bundles of letters from Sarah tied with faded ribbon, was a small, handsome teak box. Sarah had given it to me for my 50th birthday. "Your workshop is for wood and sawdust, Frank," she'd said, smiling. "This is for paper. Paper matters more than you think. Keep the important things in here, where they won't get lost." I ran my fingers over the smooth wood. The important things. For years, that had meant her letters, the kids' birth certificates, the deed to our first little house that we'd sold long ago. After she died and I moved in with Chloe, I'd mostly forgotten about it. I lifted it from the chest. It was heavier than I remembered. There was a small combination lock on the front. My mind was blank. What was the code? My fingers fumbled, trying old addresses, dates, nothing. Then, a memory surfaced, clear as a ship's bell on a foggy morning. Sarah, tapping the lock and winking. "Just in case you forget, it's the day your life really started. Not my birthday. Not even our wedding day. The day Chloe was born. The 14th of August, 2087. With trembling fingers, I dialed the numbers. The lock sprang open with a soft, satisfying click. The first thing I saw inside was a photograph of Sarah, younger than the one on my nightstand, laughing into the camera. Beneath it were the bundles of her letters. My first instinct was to close the box, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief. This was a treasure chest of a life they were telling me to pack away. But my hand brushed against something stiff and thick at the bottom. A large, sealed manila envelope. It was unlabeled, but it had the heft of officialdom. Curiosity, the first feeling other than anger or sorrow I'd felt in days, made me pull it out. The paper was thick, almost like cardstock. I broke the dry, brittle seal. Inside was a stack of documents, held together by a large metal clip. The top page was dense with legal text, stamped with the official seal of the state of Oregon. Statutory warranty deed. I scanned the page, my eyes struggling to focus on the formal, archaic language. Then I found the section detailing the grantee. My breath caught in my throat. My finger traced the typewritten words, as if I could verify their reality through touch. Grantee. James Franklin Miller, an unmarried man, as sole owner. Sole owner. Not James Miller and Chloe Thompson. Not held in trust. Not co-signed. Just my name. I flipped through the rest of the pages. The title report, the closing statements from 6 years ago. Every signature at the bottom of every critical page was mine and mine alone. I remembered the day at the title office now. Chloe and Leo had been there, but her credit was a wreck from her first marriage, and Leo had no stable income to show. The bank would only approve the loan with me as the sole borrower, using the $250,000 from the sale of my house as the massive down payment, and my pension as the guaranteed source of income. It had seemed like a formality at the time, a means to an end to help my daughter. Beneath the deed was the mortgage agreement, a thick, intimidating document. I scanned it quickly, looking for the borrower information, and there it was again. Borrower, James Franklin Miller, Co. Borrower. N divided by A. I sank back on my heels. The documents spread out on the floor around me. The pieces began to click into place with the force of a tectonic shift. The condescending lecture from Leo. What you paid was essentially rent, room and board. The list on my nightstand. The brochure for my new optimized life. It was all built on a foundation of lies. A lie I had been too grief-stricken and trusting to see. This wasn't their house I was living in. It was my house. I looked from the stark, undeniable words on the deed to the photo of Sarah in my hand, and I heard her voice again, not as a memory of grief, but as a clear, urgent command across time. Don't let them erase you. Even foundations crack under too much weight. She hadn't just been giving me a warning. She had been giving me the tools to survive. She knew, in her quiet, practical way, she knew that this paper mattered. It was the anchor, the one thing that could hold me fast in the storm they had created. The low, smoldering pilot light of anger in my gut roared to life, a clean, white-hot flame. The grief was still there, a deep and permanent ache, but it was no longer the only thing. It was now joined by a powerful, crystalline resolve. I wasn't a tenant being evicted. I was a landlord who had been disrespected. And the fog of despair began to burn away, revealing the path forward with a sudden, shocking clarity. I didn't sleep. The rest of the night was spent not in packing, but in planning. With the legal documents spread before me on the floor like a battle map, I sat in the armchair and let the white-hot anger cool into something harder and more useful: steel. For the first time in 6 years, the path ahead wasn't obscured by the fog of grief or the shadow of obligation. It was a straight, clear, and very narrow line. Dawn broke, painting the sky over the Pacific in strokes of gray and pale rose. I didn't pack the sea chest or the boxes of memories. That was a fight for another day. Instead, I moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. I took the small duffel bag I'd packed earlier and added only one thing: the manila envelope containing the deed and the mortgage papers, now tucked safely in a waterproof pouch I used to use for boat manuals. I zipped the bag closed. It was light. A life's worth of obligation, it turned out, was the heaviest thing I'd been carrying. I walked out of my room and down the hall just as the smell of brewing coffee began to fill the house. Chloe and Leo were in the kitchen, the heart of the home I'd provided. They were dressed in expensive athletic wear, looking like they were about to go on a brisk, self-congratulatory jog on the beach. They stopped talking when they saw me, my bag slung over my shoulder. A look of relief washed over Chloe's face, quickly followed by a patronizing smile. "Oh, good," she said, her voice bright and dismissive. "You're being practical about this. I told you it would be better once you'd had some time to process. It really is for the best, Dad." Leo didn't even look up from his phone, just grunted in agreement as he scrolled through some social media feed. To them, my bag wasn't an act of defiance. It was the whimper of surrender. I was following the script they had written for me. I walked past them toward the front door without a word. My silence seemed to unnerve Chloe more than an argument would have. "Wait, Dad," she said, her tone sharpening slightly. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "Okay. Fine, but before you go, can you take care of something?" She gestured toward a pile of mail on the granite countertop, the countertop I'd installed. "The Cascade internet bill is due today. The autopay is still linked to your account, so if you could just make sure that goes through before you know." She waved a hand vaguely, as if my departure was a minor errand. The internet, the lifeblood of her blog and his Phantom app, the invisible utility that allowed them to project their curated lives to the world. It was perfect. I stopped and turned to face her fully. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the anger show. I just held her gaze. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the pristine kitchen with the force of a thrown rock. Chloe blinked. "No? What do you mean, no? It's only $150. It'll be a mess to switch it over if the service gets cut off." "I'm sure it will," I said. I slowly shrugged the duffel bag off my shoulder and set it down. I pulled out my smartphone, the one they probably thought I only used for weather forecasts and emergency calls. My fingers, steady and sure, navigated through the banking app to the scheduled payments page. I'd been up for a long time. I'd had plenty of time to explore the app's features. I found the recurring payment to Cascade Internet. and right beside it, in bold red letters, was the status I had updated an hour ago. I held the phone out for her to see. Recurring payment canceled. Chloe stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in confusion. The words didn't seem to compute. Leo finally looked up from his phone, a frown of irritation on his face. "What's the problem?" "The problem," I said, my voice as calm and cold as the deep ocean, "is that my arrangement here is ending." I met Chloe's widening eyes. "That's your problem now." I put my phone back in my pocket, shouldered my bag, and turned back to the door. I could feel their stunned silence behind me. It was a new kind of silence. Not the awkward, pitying silence from the party. This was the silence of a power grid, suddenly going dark. "Wait," Leo stammered, finally finding his voice. "What the hell does that mean?" I opened the front door, and the fresh, salty morning air washed over me. It smelled like freedom. "It means the lights, the water, the roof over your head." I paused, and for the first time, I looked directly at Leo with the full, cold weight of my newfound clarity. "It's all your problem now." "Oh?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not waiting for a reply. I didn't slam it. I just closed it with a soft, final click, leaving them standing frozen in the sudden, terrifying darkness of their own making. Walking away from that house was like stepping off a boat I'd spent 6 years building, right into the cold, choppy water. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the kitchen carried me for the first few blocks, a hot, powerful current. But as I walked through the familiar streets of Port Blossom, a profound and unnerving sense of dislocation set in. I had a duffel bag, a few $100s in my wallet, and a set of legal papers that felt as heavy as an anchor. I was free, but I was also adrift. My feet carried me not toward the picturesque downtown, but toward the older, more rugged part of town near the marina. I ended up at the Spindrift Motel, a place I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. It was a simple, one-story building with a faded sign of a smiling cartoon sandpiper. The room smelled of salt, damp sea air, and the faint, clean scent of bleach. It was sparse, honest, and blessedly anonymous. It was a safe harbor. I dropped my bag on the worn chenille bedspread and sat for a moment in the quiet, letting the magnitude of my situation settle over me. The anger had gotten me out the door, but anger alone couldn't navigate the storm ahead. My wife, Sarah, had been the planner, the strategist. I was the builder, the one who worked with his hands. I knew how to read the grain of a piece of wood, but not the fine print of the law. I needed an expert. I needed a navigator. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in almost 3 years, Marcus Thorne. Marcus and I weren't from the same world. He was a sharp, educated man who wore suits and argued for a living. I was a man who wore flannel and communicated best with a hammer and saw. We'd met a decade ago when he, a young public defender new to town, had come into my workshop asking for an estimate to repair a small, dilapidated sailboat he'd inherited from his father. The boat was a wreck, and he didn't have the money to fix it. But I saw the desperate hope in his eyes, a desire to hold on to the last piece of his dad he had left. So we made a deal. He'd buy the materials, and I'd provide the labor and the knowledge, free of charge. We spent an entire summer, side by side, rebuilding that boat from the keel up. I taught him how to plane wood, how to caulk a seam, how to read the wind. He'd bring coffee and tell me stories about the courtroom. By the end of it, he had a seaworthy vessel, and I had a friend. He answered on the third ring. "Frank Miller! To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me the sea change sprung a leak." His voice was warmer and deeper than I remembered, filled with the easy confidence of success. He was a partner at his own firm now. "The boat's fine, Marcus," I said, my own voice sounding tired and thin. "It's me. I'm the one taking on water." The warmth in his voice immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And so, I told him. I laid out the whole ugly story, starting with my wife's last wish and ending with the canceled internet payment that morning. I told it the way I'd build a boat, plank by plank, fact by fact, keeping the emotion out of it as best I could. I told him about the deed, the mortgage, the words sole owner. He listened without interruption, the silence on his end of the line so profound I could almost hear him thinking. When I finished, he didn't offer pity. He offered something better. "Frank," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous hum, "they ambushed you. They humiliated you, and tried to throw you out of your own damn house. I just, I don't know what to do next, Marcus. Yes, you do, he said firmly. You've already done the hardest part. You stood up to them. Now let me handle the rest. I can't afford your rates now, son, I admitted, the shame of it stinging. Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. Frank, listen to me. You spent 4 months of your life teaching me how to save the only thing my father ever left me. You gave me back a piece of my own history. You don't owe me a dime. I owe you. Let me navigate this for you. You've already built a rock-solid case. You just need someone to pilot it through the courts. Relief so potent it almost made my knees weak, washed over me. I wasn't adrift anymore. I had a captain. Okay, I said, the word thick with emotion. Okay, he confirmed. Now, first things first, don't talk to them. Don't answer their calls. Don't respond to their texts. Let them scream into the void. Second, gather every piece of paper you have. The deed, the mortgage, every bill you've ever paid if you can find it. We meet tomorrow morning. My office, 9 a.m. We're going to chart a course, Frank. And I promise you, we're going to get your ship back. The meeting in Marcus Thorne's office felt like being in the calm, quiet eye of a hurricane. His firm was on the top floor of the tallest building in Port Blossom, with a panoramic view of the harbor and the vast, gray expanse of the Pacific. Surrounded by shelves of thick, leather-bound law books, Marcus laid out my documents on his polished mahogany desk. He examined the deed and the mortgage with a focused intensity, his pen making small, sharp notes on a legal pad. It's ironclad, Frank, he said finally, leaning back in his chair and looking at me with a grim smile. You're the sole legal owner. They have no lease, written or verbal. In the eyes of the law, they are tenants at will, which is a generous term for guests who have massively overstayed their welcome. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal eviction notice. This is the next step, but I want you to be prepared. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Their first move was to underestimate you. Their next move will be to try and break you. They are going to escalate this before they accept defeat. It's going to get ugly. Your only job, he said, tapping a finger on the desk for emphasis, is to not engage. Document everything. Let the tide of their panic rise, and do not let it pull you under. I walked out of that office feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in years. I had the law, the truth, and a loyal friend on my side. I went back to the Spindrift Motel, the eviction notice tucked safely in the envelope with my other papers. For about an hour, there was peace, and then the tide came in. It started with a single buzzing vibration on the nightstand. My phone lit up. Chlo. I watched it ring, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I let it go to voicemail just as Marcus had instructed. 10 seconds later, it rang again, and again, and again. A frantic, relentless barrage. In the space of 5 minutes, she called 12 times. When she finally stopped, a string of voicemail notifications populated my screen. Then came Leo's number. 3 calls, one right after the other. Then back to Chloe. This went on for the better part of an hour. A digital siege. I turned the ringer off, but I couldn't ignore the way the screen kept flashing. A desperate, angry strobe light in the dim motel room. Curiosity finally got the better of me. I listened to the first voicemail from Chloe. Her voice was high and strained with panic. Dad, pick up the phone. The internet is out. I have a scheduled brand post due for a sponsorship with Viridian Skincare, and I can't upload it. This is my job. You can't just do this. Call me back right now. The next one, recorded 10 minutes later, was a completely different tone. Soft, wheedling, and utterly false. Daddy, it's me. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning. I was stressed. I'm sorry, we can talk about this, I promise. Please, just turn the internet back on and let's talk. Please? Leo's message was a stark contrast. There was no pleading, only barely concealed menace. All right, Frank, the joke's over. You've made your little point. You're being incredibly selfish and costing your daughter money. You have no idea the legal trouble you're in for, old man. You're going to regret this. Call Chloe back before you make this 1,000 times worse for yourself. I sat on the bed, feeling the walls of the motel room start to close in. This was what Marcus had warned me about, the rising tide of their panic. But I was not prepared for the next wave. My phone buzzed with a text message. It wasn't words, it was a picture. It was of my grandchildren, 7-year-old Emma, and 5-year-old Noah, sitting on the living room couch. Emma was staring at the camera, her little face a mask of confusion and sadness. Noah was actively crying, his cheeks tear-streaked, his hand reaching out as if pleading. My breath hitched. My hands started to shake. This was a low blow. A calculated, cruel strike aimed directly at the most vulnerable part of my heart. A second text came through immediately after the photo. Chloe, look what you're doing to them. They don't understand why their grandpa left. Emma keeps asking if she did something wrong. Noah cried himself to sleep last night. Is this what you wanted, Dad? Is this really worth hurting them? The steel resolve I had felt just hours before seemed to melt, leaving me exposed and raw. I stared at the photo of their precious, innocent faces. This was my fault. I was hurting them. The weight of their sadness felt infinitely heavier than my own humiliation. For a terrifying moment, I almost reached for the phone to call her, to tell her I'd fix it, that I'd come back, that I'd do whatever it took to make Noah stop crying. But then Sarah's voice echoed in my memory, a faint but clear signal through the storm of my own guilt. Don't let them erase you. This emotional blackmail was a part of that erasure. It was using my love for them as a weapon against me. I closed my eyes, took a ragged breath, and saved a screenshot of the photo and the text message. I filed it away in my mind under a new category, just as Marcus had told me to. Not family. Evidence. I stared at the image of my grandchildren's tear-streaked faces for a long, painful minute. The text message was a poison dart, and it had hit its mark. Every instinct I had as a father and a grandfather screamed at me to call, to soothe, to surrender. This was a pain I was causing, and the guilt was a physical, nauseating thing. My old phone buzzed again in my hand, another call from Chloe, another tremor in the ongoing emotional earthquake. And in that moment, I understood. This phone wasn't a connection anymore. It was an open wound, and they would keep pouring salt into it until I bled out. Marcus had told me to let the tide rise, but he never said I had to stand on the shore and let it drown me. I needed a lighthouse, a safe place to stand and watch the storm without being consumed by it. My decision was instant and absolute. I put on my jacket, left the motel room, and walked to a small electronics shop a few blocks away. It wasn't a sleek, minimalist store like the ones Chloe favored. It smelled of soldering flux and old cardboard, and the shelves were crammed with a chaotic array of gadgets. I didn't look at the expensive smartphones. I bought the simplest, cheapest, prepaid phone they had, a rugged little device with actual buttons and a screen the size of a postage stamp. It cost $40. It was the best money I'd spent in 6 years. Back in the quiet of the Spindrift Motel, I began a ritual that solidified the change inside me. I took my old smartphone, the one that was still flashing with missed calls and notifications, and I performed a kind of exorcism. I went deep into the settings and turned off every audible notification. The ringer, the text alert, the voicemail chime, the vibration, all of it. Silence. Then, I plugged it into my laptop, which I'd set up on the small desk by the window. I opened a new spreadsheet. I created 4 columns: date, time, caller, and summary. Methodically, I began to log every call, every voicemail, every text from the past 24 hours. October 1st, 2025 vertical bar, 2:15 p.m. vertical bar, Chloe vertical bar, voicemail, panic over internet service. October 1st, 2025 vertical bar, 2:25 p.m. vertical bar, Chloe vertical bar, voicemail, false apology, manipulative tone. October 1st, 2025 vertical bar, 2:40 p.m. vertical bar, Leo vertical bar, voicemail, vague legal threats, calling me old man. October 1st, 2025 vertical bar, 3:52 p.m. vertical bar, Chloe vertical bar, text, photo of crying grandchildren, emotional blackmail. The act of transcribing their emotional chaos into cold, hard data was transformative. It stripped the poison from their words, leaving only evidence. My old phone was no longer a weapon they could use against me. It was now a tool, a silent, blinking sentinel on the desk. It was my lighthouse. It would watch the storm, record its fury, and I, the keeper, would remain safe inside, observing from a distance. Finally, I unwrapped my new phone, The plastic packaging crinkled loudly in the quiet room. I activated it, the little screen glowing to life with a simple, generic welcome message. I opened the contacts list. It was beautifully, blissfully empty. I programmed in only 3 numbers. Marcus, Evelyn, motel front desk. That was it. That was my entire world now. A world I controlled. With a sense of profound relief, I used the new phone to send my first text message. It was to Marcus. The tide is high, a lot of noise, but I'm holding fast. This is a new, secure number for essential contact only. His reply came back, less than a minute later. Good man, that's how you do it. The lighthouse doesn't fight the storm, Frank, it just stands. I set the new phone on the nightstand beside my bed. It was silent. On the desk across the room, my old phone's screen flashed once, signaling another incoming text I would not read tonight. Let the tide rise. I was finally on high ground. For 3 days, I followed the routine. Each morning, I would make a cup of instant coffee in my motel room, open my laptop, and log the debris from the previous night's storm. My spreadsheet grew with a grim satisfaction. The entries told a story of escalating desperation. Chloe's messages had devolved from panicked demands to long, rambling, guilt-laden texts. Leo's had become more aggressive, filled with crude insults and poorly researched legal threats. I copied, pasted, and saved it all, my old phone a silent, blinking witness on the desk. My new phone remained quiet. I was the lighthouse keeper, and the storm was beginning to exhaust itself against the rocks. On the 4th day, a Friday, I met Marcus at his office. The official eviction notice was waiting for me, crisp and imposing in a long legal envelope. It had been notarized and filed with the county court. It was no longer a threat. It was a fact. They won't see this coming, Frank, Marcus said, handing me the envelope. They think you're just hiding out, trying to punish them. They don't understand that you've moved past punishment and into procedure. He introduced me to a man named David, who had the impassive, patient demeanor of someone who deals with human drama for a living. He was a professional process server. David will accompany you, Marcus explained. He will handle the delivery and provide a sworn affidavit that service was completed. This is not a conversation or a negotiation, Frank. It's a legal notification. You are there as a witness. Say as little as possible. Let the paper do the talking. Be a rock. Let their waves crash against you. The drive over was silent and tense. David drove, his presence both a comfort and a stark reminder of how far things had come. I was no longer dealing with a family matter. I was executing a legal action against the occupants of my property. As we turned onto my street, I saw the house. The lawn needed mowing. A child's bicycle lay on its side near the porch steps. Small signs of a life, my life, that was fraying at the edges without me. David parked at the curb, and we walked up the path I had laid myself years ago. He stood in front of the door, and I stood a few feet behind him, to the side. My heart was a cold, heavy drum in my chest. This was the point of no return. David rang the doorbell. We waited. We could hear the television inside. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. The door was wrenched open, and there was Leo. He was unshaven, wearing a stained t-shirt, his face a mask of irritation that curdled into pure rage the moment he saw me. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled, taking a protective step onto the threshold to block the entrance. "You've got a lot of nerve." David cut him off, his voice calm and utterly devoid of emotion. "Are you Leo Sterling?" Leo's eyes darted to the stranger, thrown off balance. "Yeah, who's asking?" "I'm here to serve a legal notice to you, and to Chloe Thompson," David said, extending the envelope. Leo stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't take it. "We're not accepting anything from him. Get the hell off his property." "Oh, sir, under Oregon state law, I am only required to offer it to you," David said, his voice still perfectly level. "If you refuse to take it, I can leave it here in your presence, and you will still be considered legally served." "What is going on?" Chloe's voice came from behind Leo. She pushed past him, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes found me, and for a second, a flicker of hope crossed her face, as if she thought I had come back to surrender. Then she saw the official envelope in David's hand. The hope died instantly. She took the envelope from David's hand, her own trembling slightly. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. I watched her face, a slow-motion study in comprehension and horror. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth fell open. She looked up from the page, her eyes wide with disbelief, and locked onto mine. "Notice to vacate," she whispered, the words barely audible. 30 days. Frank, you can't." Tears welled in her eyes. "This is our home. You can't throw us out of our home." Leo snatched the document from her hand. His face flushed a deep, mottled red as he read. "This is bullshit," he exploded, waving the paper at me. "You can't do this. We have rights, squatters' rights. I looked it up. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I remained silent, my hands in my pockets, my expression unreadable. I was a rock. Leo, enraged by my silence, took a menacing step forward. "You think you can just destroy our lives, you selfish old bastard?" David stepped smoothly between us. "Sir, I would advise you to step back. The notice is served. Our business here is concluded." Chloe had crumpled against the doorframe, sobbing. "Please, Daddy, don't do this, please." Her tears, the sound of her calling me Daddy. For the first time in years, it was the highest, most desperate wave yet. But the rock held. I looked past her, past Leo's impotent rage, and met the calm, professional gaze of the process server. "Is service complete, David?" I asked, my voice steady. "Service is complete," he confirmed. "Then we're done here." I turned, without another look at my daughter or her husband, and walked away. Their voices followed me down the path, Chloe's broken pleas and Leo's volley of furious, empty threats. They crashed against my back and fell away, powerless. The 30-day clock was ticking, and for the first time it was they, not I, who were running out of time. The confrontation at the house felt like a massive wave crashing onto the shore, a violent explosion of foam and fury. I expected the days that followed to be filled with the aftershock. More waves, more noise, more anger. Instead, there was silence, a deep, unnerving, and absolute quiet. After returning to the motel, I had called Marcus. "Service complete," I told him, my voice still thrumming with leftover adrenaline. "Good," he'd said. "Now the real waiting begins, Frank. They have two options. They fight or they fold. The silence over the next few weeks will tell you what they're planning. Stay the course. Stay quiet." He was right. My old phone, the lighthouse on the desk, went dark. After the initial flurry of enraged, incoherent text that evening, the screen stopped flashing. The calls ceased. The voicemails stopped. The constant, buzzing pressure that had been a feature of my life for the past week simply vanished. It was like the tide going out, pulling all the noise and debris with it, leaving behind a vast, empty, and eerily quiet shoreline. The silence was a different kind of psychological warfare. The harassment had been exhausting, but at least I knew what they were doing. This quiet was a blank page, and my mind, in its darkest moments, filled it with anxious speculation. Were they hiring a lawyer? Were they planning to barricade themselves inside? Were they destroying my property out of spite? To keep my sanity, I fell into a new rhythm. I treated the waiting not as a passive state, but as an active recovery. Each morning, I would leave the sterile quiet of the motel and drive out to the coast. I'd walk for miles along the rugged beaches, watching the real tide ebb and flow, the relentless, predictable rhythm of the ocean, a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. I was rediscovering a version of myself I had packed away 6 years ago. I spent afternoons at the marina, walking the familiar docks. The scent of diesel, salt, and wet wood was the smell of my own life. Old friends, fishermen, and fellow craftsmen would clap me on the shoulder. They didn't ask many questions, men like us, rarely did, but their simple, solid presence was a silent statement of support. The news was getting around the small town, and from the respectful nods I received, I knew the story being told was the true one. Once a week, I'd have coffee with Evelyn. She was my anchor to the world I'd left behind, and my truest link to Sarah's memory. "You did the right thing, you know," she said during our second meeting, stirring her tea. Sarah saw this in Chloe. She loved her to pieces, but she was never blind to that streak of selfish entitlement. She worried about it constantly. "Oh, I just hope the kids are okay," I confessed, the familiar ache returning. Evelyn gave me a shrewd look. "I heard something interesting," she said, lowering her voice. "My niece works at the U-Storage facility out on the highway. She saw Leo there last week, looking at a 10 by 20 unit. The information landed like a stone in a still pond. A storage unit. That wasn't the action of someone digging in for a legal battle. That was the action of someone who was starting to pack. I drove back to my motel, feeling a flicker of something that wasn't quite hope, but a release of tension. The silence wasn't a precursor to a fight. It was the quiet, resentful hum of defeat. They weren't plotting a counterattack. They were mapping out their retreat. The wave had broken, and now the water was pulling back. But the 30-day deadline was still 2 weeks away, and I knew the tide would have to come in one last time before it was truly over. The 2 weeks after my coffee with Evelyn crawled by with the slow, deliberate pace of an incoming tide. The silence from the house was a constant, humming presence in the background of my life. The clue about the storage unit had eased the sharpest edges of my anxiety, but a deep, unsettled tension remained. I knew there had to be one last act. A family wound this deep doesn't just heal over with silence. It festers. It happened on a Tuesday, with exactly 1 week left until the eviction date I had circled in red on the cheap motel calendar. My new phone, the quiet little flip phone that had become my lifeline, rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to ignore it, but Marcus had advised me to answer unknown numbers, just in case it was a lawyer or a service related to the house. I flipped it open. "Hello? Dad?" It was Chloe. Her voice was thin and fragile, stripped of all its previous anger and condescension. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, the voice of a little girl who had fallen and scraped her knee. It was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at my heart. "What do you want, Chloe?" I said, my own voice, gentle but firm. I could hear her take a shaky breath. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry. For the party. For everything. You were right. We were awful to you, and I've been thinking about it every single day." The apology hung in the air. The old me would have latched onto it, a starving man given a crumb of bread. But the new me waited. This wasn't the reason for her call. This was just the opening move. "We can't find a place, Dad," she said, her voice cracking. The desperation began to seep through. "The credit checks, the security deposits. No one will approve us. We have nowhere to go. The kids." "There are apartments, Chloe," I said quietly. "There are always options." "Not for us. Not in a week," she cried. "Look, what if we make this right? We could pay you rent. We'll sign a real lease, whatever you want." "It wouldn't be much at first. I know we can't afford the full mortgage payment, but it would be something. We can make this work. We can be a family again." This was her final gambit. An attempt to reframe our relationship, to turn me from an owner reclaiming his property into a landlord negotiating a lease. It was a clever, desperate play, trying to appeal to the part of me that still yearned for a family. But that part of me was now insulated by a wall of hard-won wisdom. "No, Chloe," I said. The word was soft, but absolute. "That's not going to happen. The deadline is next Wednesday." Her breath hitched, and I knew what was coming next. She was deploying her last, most powerful weapon. "Please, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Think about Mom. You stood in that hospital room, and you promised her. You promised her you would always take care of me. Is this taking care of me? Throwing your daughter and your grandchildren out on the street with nowhere to go? Would she want this? Would this make her proud of you?" The blow landed, sharp and painful. She had taken the purest, most sacred memory I had and twisted it into a tool of emotional blackmail. For a moment, the image of Sarah's tired, trusting face flashed in my mind, and my resolve wavered. But then, the full truth of Sarah's last words, the hard part of the promise, returned to me, clearer than ever. "Don't let them erase you. I think about your mother every single second of every day, Chloe," I said, my voice low and heavy with a sadness so profound it felt ancient. "And you're right, I made her a promise to look after you. But I also remember the rest of it, the part you never knew. She was afraid of this, afraid you would consume me, afraid you'd take and take until there was nothing left." I paused, letting the weight of my next words gather. "Your mother would not want me to set myself on fire to keep you warm. She would be heartbroken by what you did at that party. She would be ashamed of what you've become." A strangled sob came through the phone. I had taken her ultimate weapon and turned it back on her, not with anger, but with the devastating power of the truth. There was nothing left for her to say. There was nothing left for me to say. "The deadline is Wednesday," I repeated quietly. "Goodbye, Chloe." I ended the call and set the phone down. There was no triumph, no victory, just a vast, quiet, and deeply painful sense of finality. The last tie had been cut, the last gambit had failed. Now, all that was left was the end. The morning of the final day arrived not with a storm, but with a quiet, somber gray sky that hung over the Oregon coast like a shroud. Wednesday. The date I had circled on the calendar in my motel room. The end of the line. There was a strange sense of ceremony to my movements. I showered and dressed, not in my usual work pants and flannel, but in a clean pressed shirt and my good slacks. It felt like I was attending a funeral. In a way, I was. After 6 weeks, I checked out of the Spindrift Motel. The woman at the front desk wished me well. I walked out into the cool morning air with the same single duffel bag I had arrived with. I had entered this battle carrying only what I needed, and I was leaving the same way. The rest was just noise. I didn't drive directly to the house. The eviction notice stipulated that they must vacate the premises by 12 noon. I had no desire for a prolonged, ugly confrontation. My strategy, my very survival, had been built on removing myself from their emotional chaos. I would not stumble at the finish line. I parked my truck a block away, in a spot where I could see the house but remain unseen, and I waited. At 11:30 a.m., a rented U-Haul truck sat in my driveway, its loading ramp down like a clumsy, lolling tongue. The sight sent a complicated jolt through me, a surge of grim satisfaction mixed with a profound, aching sadness. It was real. They were leaving. I watched them. They moved like ghosts in their own lives. Leo, stripped of his usual swagger, hauled boxes into the truck with a sullen, resentful energy. His shoulders were slumped in defeat. Chloe moved back and forth from the house, her face pale and drawn, directing the placement of furniture with a weary, detached air. There was no fight left in them. They looked like what they were, a couple whose foundation had been kicked out from under them. Then I saw the children. Emma and Noah were sitting on the front steps, huddled together. Noah was holding a stuffed bear, and Emma was just watching, her expression lost and confused as her world was packed into cardboard boxes. The sight was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air from my lungs. Whatever victory I was winning here, they were the collateral damage, and that was a heavy, inescapable truth. At exactly 12:01 p.m., I started my truck and drove the final block. I parked directly across the street and got out, closing the door with a solid, definitive thud. I walked across the pavement, my footsteps echoing in the quiet street. Leo saw me first. He was wrestling a floor lamp into the back of the truck. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted hatred in his gaze before he looked away, turned his back to me, and slammed the truck's roll-up door with a deafening crash. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and slammed that door too. He would not speak to me. He would not even look at me. His pride was shattered, and his silence was his last, pathetic shield. Chloe watched him go, then turned to face me. She looked 10 years older than she had at her birthday party. The life of the party, the glowing influencer, was gone. In her place was a tired, defeated woman standing in the ruins of the life she had taken for granted. She walked toward me, her hand held out. In her palm was a set of keys. My keys. "They're all here," she said, her voice a near whisper. "The front door, the back, the garage remote." I took them from her. The metal was cool against my skin, their familiar weight, a strange comfort in my hand. They were the keys to my home, my life, my future. "I really am sorry, Dad," she said, finally meeting my eyes. Hers were red, rimmed and hollow. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had created and cared for, and felt a wave of immense, tragic sadness. I believed her. I believed she was sorry now, in the face of these consequences. But it wasn't enough. "I know, Chloe," I said, and my voice was softer than I expected, "but sorry doesn't fix this." She flinched, as if I'd struck her. She nodded, a small, jerky movement, accepting the finality of it. There was no absolution for her here. There was only the consequence. She turned without another word, and walked to the passenger side of the U-Haul, climbing in. The truck's diesel engine rumbled to life, a loud, ugly sound that tore through the peace of the neighborhood. I stood alone in my driveway and watched as the truck pulled away from the curb. As it passed me, I saw her through the passenger window. My granddaughter, Emma. Her small face was pressed against the glass, her eyes wide. She lifted her hand, her tiny fingers uncurling, and gave a small, hesitant wave. My throat closed, my chest seized. It was the purest, most innocent gesture in the midst of this ugly, adult wreckage, and it broke me. I wanted to wave back. Every fiber of my being wanted to lift my hand and tell her that her grandpa still loved her. But I couldn't. My arm felt like it was encased in lead. I just stood there, a statue in my own driveway, and watched as the truck reached the end of the street, turned the corner, and disappeared. They were gone. The house behind me was silent. The street was empty, and I was utterly, completely alone, with the keys to my reclaimed life growing heavy in my hand. For a long time, I just stood in the driveway, the keys growing warm in my clenched fist. The rumble of the U-Haul's engine faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of my neighborhood, a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of wind in the tall pine trees, the cry of a seagull overhead. The street was empty. The drama was over. All that was left was the quiet, hollow space where my family used to be. With a slow, deliberate breath, I walked to the front door. My hand was steady as I slid the key into the lock I had installed myself 6 years ago. It turned with a familiar, satisfying click. The door swung inward, opening not into a battleground, but into a silent, empty house. It was clean, shockingly so. They must have spent their last days here, scrubbing away the evidence of their existence. The air smelled of bleach and lemon cleaner, a sterile scent that failed to mask the emptiness. My footsteps echoed on the bare hardwood floors as I walked through the living room. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Indentations in the carpet marked where their sofa had been, like faint scars. The bookshelves I had so carefully built stood bare, their empty shelves like open mouths, waiting for stories that were no longer there. I walked through each room, a solitary ghost in my own home. The kitchen was spotless, the granite countertops gleaming. I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of what had been my room, then Leo's office, and was now, once again, just a room. The best natural light in the house, he'd said. It was bright, empty, and peaceful. The disrespect, the anger, the humiliation that had soaked into these walls felt like it had been bleached away with everything else. But the house didn't feel like home yet. It was just a structure, a well-maintained shell. The soul of the place, for me, had always been elsewhere. I went back downstairs and through the kitchen to the door that led to the garage. I unlocked it and stepped inside. And there it was. Home. The scent of cedar, sawdust, and linseed oil filled my lungs a fragrance more comforting than any memory the house held. My tools hung in their proper places on the pegboard walls, shadowed outlines a testament to their long use. My workbench, scarred and stained from decades of labor, stood like a faithful old friend. This was the one place their drama had never touched. This was the sanctuary. This was the part of my life, of myself, that had always been, and would always be, completely mine. I walked to the workbench and ran my hand over its worn, familiar surface. I thought of Chloe's final, desperate apology. I thought of Emma's small, waving hand. There was no joy in this victory, no thrill of revenge. The cost had been immense. I had lost my daughter. I had a long, uncertain road ahead if I ever wanted to rebuild a bridge to my grandchildren. But standing here, in the quiet of my workshop, I understood what I had truly reclaimed. It wasn't just a building. It wasn't just about money. It was about the promise I had made to Sarah. Don't let them erase you. For 6 years I had been Chloe's dad, a living support system, a foundation to be built upon and then forgotten. My own name, my own life, had been slowly sanded away. Now, I was just Frank again. I picked up an old familiar handplane, its wooden handle worn smooth and dark from the grip of my own hand. I found a piece of scrap cedar on the floor. I placed it on the workbench, locked it into the vise, and set the plane to its surface. I drew it back, and then pushed forward. A perfect, fragrant curl of wood spiraled up from the blade. The sound a soft, shearing shff was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of something rough being made smooth, the sound of creation, the sound of a man starting to build again, not a house for his children, but a life for himself. And it was enough.